that animals do have arms. Magpies collect silvery things and have exhibitions in their nests. This idea of art is some kind of, Kantian idealist thing up here is a complete bourgeois misconception. But as a young man, Marx read his art instincts of animals. It's Kunsttrieb, so it's making craft drive of Tiere, of animals. And he mentioned enjoying it in the letter to his father. That's why John Bellamy Foster talks about it. Now, explicitly, he attacks Descartes for calling animals machines, devoid of that spark of the divine, which the Christians call a soul. And this attack on Descartes, I think, is really important. This book's never been translated into English. I tried to get publishers I was in contact with interested. I just can't find anybody to translate this book. This attack on Descartes, deep anti-Cartesian, is the way we'll free ourselves of the French disease of structuralism and postmodernism and everything. Tony Negri wrote a dissertation on Descartes, and it's absolute crap, and explains all Negri's mistakes afterwards. The French brought up with Cartesianism. It's their bourgeois education, and these early critics of Descartes are incredibly important. Not only Reimarus, but Vico, Giambattista Vico. His fantastic polemics against Descartes. Again, nobody talks about them, although they are the basis of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. In The Art Instincts of Animals, Reimarus reviews the entire corpus of literature on animals in the Western tradition and Arabic tradition, and notes how universal is the drive, and uses the same word that Freud used for instinct, trieb, to take care of offspring. Animals will sacrifice their own comfort to feed and shelter their young, and leave them die to protect them. Hence, altruism or the good life is not something we need to be taught by vicars or professors, it's our very instinct. And it's this species being which Marx saw needed to be protected from the incursions of bourgeois competition and exploitation and ideology. Now, when I improvised this idea to Paul Blackledge on the phone, he went, "Yeah, fantastic, man, I like it." So, Marx's species being explains the stakes in the bitter debates around culture we've had in the SWP. Dada and punk and free improvisation trust our instincts. Their method is to cut away the ballast of inherited culture. Those who defend serious culture, our heritage, proceed from the Christian vision of man as inherently evil, impulses for the good permanently at war with diabolical animal instincts. The party member who thinks iced tea is more beautiful than the victory of Samothrace must be chided for Philistinism. And I've had a lot of that. And so I think it's irresponsible for Paul to allow himself to be seen as borrowing ethics from MacIntyre without criticising these Christian residues. There's one section of Marxism ethics which suggests that a return to Aristotle might have its advantages, but it leaves one to considering the place of poetry in politics, which is definitely not Paul's brief. Indeed, the one cultural moment in the book comes, I didn't note it down because it's a passing reference, it didn't matter, and then it took me like half an hour to find the passage in the book again because I hadn't indexed it, so then I put it in the index. It comes when Paul cites Kallinikos, quoting Adorno, to say that maybe the shock of abstract reasoning could be like the shock of Schoenberg and Beckett, a salutary dose of salt for bourgeois coziness. So it seems that music and literature can only be mentioned, which has the double mark of certification from two-star intellectuals, Adorno and Kallinikos. Blackledge will get further towards explaining what thought might do to restore the good life by simply turning on his TV set at random and using terms like capital and commodity and ideology. It's quite good Marxism, in other words, to explain what that medium is doing to him. But that would admit that Paul is another person knocking about in the mundane world like the rest of us and destroy the authority of his academic opus. But if it helped us to understand capitalism, it would speak to us here in this room. Now, I've never got on with Aristotle. After the brilliance of Plato's dialogues, his philosophy seemed to me soggy and his observations banal, and his distinctions, even though they were the basis of medieval scholasticism, quaint. I'm a Hobbes fan.
He's a good materialist, whereas Plato makes a god out of the collective.
Well, I know if
no, that's not true.
Plato
doesn't do that.
It's true.
That was a Catholic interpretation.
It's probably better if you could manage to get through it, but it is rather stodgy stuff to read. I didn't, Anyway, so I missed this bit of Aristotle dredged up by MacIntyre and cited by Blackledge, which I think is really interesting and useful. Aristotle distinguished theory and practice, not quite as we know it to death in politics. Theoria is knowledge of eternal truths, praxis is knowledge aiding human actions. So they're both knowledge. This demonstrates that hacks who give us packed lectures on the dialectic between theory and practice are actually Aristotelians, not Marxists. But Aristotle adds a third term, poiesis, or productive activity. I mean, when I read this, my jaw dropped, because in Andy Wilson's intro to Adorno for Revolutionaries, he quotes Brecht saying, what Lukács and those bureaucrats are frightened of is productive literary activity, our own production. And if I want to accuse the SWP of anything, it's of being frightened of the production of the comrades, their own creativity. The theory-practice couplet is revealed as an idealist, consumerist fantasy. In his, anticipated that. So if we're going to justify the UNCAM project in Aristotelian terms, it's going to be, we want to restore the place of poiesis, productivity, the root word of our poetry, in the schema of theory and practice. But Paul's lacuna, good God, I'm talking his language. I'll be accused of an aesthetical deficit next. These jokes don't sound good when I read them, aren't they? It's not just the repression of his own singular regional tongue and life experience in favour of spurious academic authority, spurious because Marxism actually demolishes what Trotsky called the bulkheads set up by the bourgeoisie between the different spheres of knowledge. His lacuna, or omission or blind spot, is Adorno. Adorno apparently is pessimistic, and we mustn't be pessimistic comrades, and so counter-revolutionary. And yet Paul has been arguing throughout that the Second International's faith in socialist progress was its Achilles heel. Sure, certain readers do turn Adorno into a repudiation of all organised left politics. However, they usually follow this with a rejection of the Marxism and Lenin of 1917, which is the substratum of his musicology, according to my book, Adorno for Revolutionaries. 1918. 1918? I don't know, which one is it? I wrote 1918, I said it was 1917. A leading example of the Adorno for fastidiously cultivating her own garden, Simon Jarvis, has just become a Roman Catholic, I hear. If the basis of our socialism has got to be some cosy, rosy, everything's going to be all right optimism, then I don't see it as galvanising anyone but retards. What makes the Communist Manifesto and Dialectic of Enlightenment as a society of spectacle stand up and shout is the electric urgency of their theoretical revelation of where we actually are, of the human utopia of solidarity and trust and love, splintered and crucified by the money principle. What I mean is the sheer pleasure evinced by the market trader on Berwick Street, who insisted on giving us an extra bunch of grapes, because I was there and bite with kids, and it was the end of the day, and just his pleasure in doing it. Or the haberdasher, 3 shops along, who refused to take any money for the yard of gold ribbon, which Iris has got burst eardrums, and she needs a little hearing aid, and so we're going to put gold ribbon around it to make it into a pretty Alice band. And the pleasure with which he said, no, I'm not taking your money. That is the germ of communism. Now,
I've got to have children to be a communist.
Right,
No.
I'm nearly getting.
No, it's got to need a hearing aid.
The Communist Manifesto.
More like
Myself.
Okay, I'm nearly finished. The Communist Manifesto and Dialectic of Enlightenment, you know, huge amounts of work by the sociology and art world recuperators to defuse them. So it's sad to see a purported revolutionary doing the same thing. Paul, put down, he's doing that to Adorno, he's defusing it. Paul, put down your McIntyre, read some Adorno, read my Adorno for Revolutionaries. You're not just an academic mind. The working class is inside you right now. You've nothing to lose but your fear of self. Use some of the swear words you use so liberally in speech. You see, reading is terrible. Use some of the swear words you use so liberally in speech in the text you publish. Okay, that's my